Hello friends. Most boards have good people around the table, people with experience who care deeply about the school, and they give their time because they want to help. And yet I've seen capable boards that can still have poor conversations. They can receive a lot of information and still not know what really matters. They can be asking sensible questions but miss the assumptions that are underneath. And they could spend an hour discussing something and still not be clear about who owns the next step. They can easily become operational without noticing, or they could just be being polite or defensive or simply stuck in their thinking. So what if the problem isn't the quality of the people around the table, but the conditions around their thinking? And after working with boards in many different schools, I kept seeing the same patterns. Not a lack of commitment on behalf of the board members, but because nobody had designed how the board should think together. And that's where collective governance by design begins. It starts with a simple idea. Boards think better when the way they think together is designed rather than left to chance. That doesn't mean scripting every conversation, and it doesn't mean making the meetings rigid, and it certainly doesn't mean giving boards just an answer key. It means being more deliberate about where the attention goes. And attention is one of the most important resources in any boardroom. When trustees are trying to work out what the paper means, attention is being spent elsewhere. And when they're unsure whether it's safe to challenge the chair, again, attention is being spent. When half the board is discussing strategy and the other half is discussing the operational implementation, attention is divided. And when nobody knows whether an item is for information or discussion or a decision, attention again is being spent. And when attention is spent on confusion, status or self-protection or avoiding friction, there's less available attention for judgement, which is what the board is there for. So the question becomes, how do we help a board direct its attention well? Collective governance by design isn't just a deck of cards, it's a way of designing how boards think together. Sometimes that happens in a workshop, where boards can explore their governance patterns. They can test difficult situations and scenarios, and build a shared language. Sometimes it happens around the board table, during real governance work. The tools are different, but the underlying thinking is the same. At the heart of both of these are 6 principles. They're not values to display on the wall. They're 6 ways of improving the conditions for collective thinking. The first is inform. Inform doesn't just mean sending papers. A board can receive 50 pages of data and still arrive to the meeting uncertain. Inform means reducing uncertainty. It means trustees understand where an issue sits, why it matters, and what's being asked of them. Are we being updated? Are we being asked to test an assumption? Is there a decision that we have to make? What belongs to the board and what belongs to the leadership? Good information creates orientation, if you like. It helps people know where they are before they're expected to move. The second principle is inquire. Now, inquire means redirecting attention through disciplined questions. Now, boards ask questions all the time, but not every question improves the thinking. Some questions certainly clarify. Some test reasoning. Some expose assumptions. Some widen the view. And some questions simply repeat a position in the form of a question. So inquire is about asking questions that help the board notice something it wasn't seeing before. Not more questions, but better questions. The third principle is inspire. Inspire is sometimes mistaken for motivation. But this isn't about making a speech or trying to lift the mood. It's about expanding the space of possibility for the school. Boards can become trapped by what already exists. the current structure, the current budget, the current way of doing things. And Inspire helps the board to ask, what else might be possible? What future are we trying to create? What are we protecting because it works? And what are we protecting simply because we're familiar with it? It gives the board permission to think beyond the present without drifting into fantasy. The fourth principle is enjoy, and this is probably the easiest one to misunderstand. Enjoy doesn't mean fun. It doesn't mean adding games to the meeting or trying to make governance entertaining. It means reducing unnecessary cognitive cost. People think less well when they're monitoring their status, when they're worried about sounding foolish, when they're trying to decode hidden expectations or politics in the room, when disagreement feels personally risky, or when the process is more complicated than it needs to be. All of that consumes attention. So enjoy is about removing avoidable friction and defensiveness so attention is available for the work of the board. A board doesn't need to be relaxed all the time. I mean, some conversations should feel difficult, but the difficulty should come from the issue, not from trying to read the politics in the room. The fifth principle is engage. And engage means investing that attention in meaningful governance work. Boards can be busy without being engaged. They can listen to long presentations, review large amounts of information, and discuss issues in detail. But the real governance work may still remain untouched. Engage asks, what requires board judgment here? Where should the board focus its energy? What are we drifting into that belongs perhaps elsewhere? It helps trustees stay with a work that only the board can do. And the sixth principle is empower. Empower means developing responsible agency. It's not simply giving people freedom. It's making authority, ownership, and accountability clear enough for people to act responsibly. When boundaries are unclear, everything gets escalated, or nothing gets escalated. Leaders wait for approval, committees may be duplicating each other's work, and trustees step into management. Good governance creates enough clarity for the right people to act while keeping accountability visible. So those are the 6 principles: inform, inquire, inspire, enjoy, engage, empower. A board doesn't need all 6 in equal measure in every conversation. It needs to recognize which one the work requires. A discussion may start with inform because trustees don't yet understand the position, and then move into inquire because an assumption needs testing, then require engage because the conversation is becoming operational, and finally empower because someone needs clear authority to act. The principles help the board choose the intervention, but principles on their own can remain abstract. A board can agree that clarity matters without becoming clearer. It can agree that challenge matters without improving its questions. It can agree that accountability matters while still leaving ownership rather vague. So each principle leads to 2 standards. The standards describe the important areas of board effectiveness. They help the board assess the wider pattern. Not one meeting, not one decision, the pattern over time. For example, does the board receive financial information that clearly separates the current position, long-term sustainability, material risks, and decisions requiring governance attention? Does it understand how authority is delegated within the school? Does it examine stakeholder experience? Does it test whether strategy is actually being interpreted consistently? Standards give the board something more useful than just a general feeling that it's doing well. They offer a shared way to examine governance over time. And each standard is demonstrated through 4 practices. Practices make good governance actionable. They describe things a board or a committee or a governance process could actually do. Now, a standard may say financial oversight should be clear and proportionate. A practice might ask the board to connect the board budget decisions directly to mission priorities. Another might require financial reporting to separate current position, sustainability, risk, and governance decisions. Another might test external partnerships against the mission, ethics, and long-term interests. And another might require scenarios to be tested before major capital commitments. The standards describe the quality the board is seeking. The practices show what it could do differently. This matters because board development can often stop at just evaluation. The board gives itself a score. It agrees that something needs attention and then not much changes. The practices create the next move. What are we going to do differently? Who will own it? When will we review it? That's how evaluation becomes action. But governance isn't only about standards and practices. It's about the mode of thinking that the work requires. The same board can behave very differently depending on the issue in front of it. A financial risk might require very careful scrutiny. A long-term strategy conversation may require a much wider sense of possibility. A leadership transition may require both support and challenge. And a crisis may require stability first and then a deeper examination later. The board deck uses 9 profiles to describe these different governance modes. They're not personality types, they're not labels for trustees. They're just ways the board may need to think together. The useful question is not which profile are we, it's more like which mode are we using now? Does it fit the work? And what might be missing? A board can potentially become too comfortable in one mode. It may scrutinize everything and therefore struggle to be imaginative. It may support leadership so strongly that challenging becomes difficult and personal. Or it may focus so much on action that it stops asking whether it's acting on the right problem. And that's where the governance lenses come in. A lens helps the board examine the mode that it's using. What does this mode make possible? What are the risks of relying on it alone? And what other perspectives might improve the judgment? The lens uses 4 movements: stabilize, support, scrutinize, and steer. Sometimes the board needs to contain an immediate risk. Sometimes it needs to support people through pressure. Sometimes it needs to examine the causes, the evidence, and the warning signs. And sometimes it needs to decide what should change over the longer term. So good governance moves between those needs rather than treating every issue in the same way. And then there are the Inquire cards. These help when the board needs to change how it's thinking. A clarifying question might surface missing evidence. A probing question might test a claim. A reframing question might shift perspective. A hypothetical question might reveal a hidden risk that wasn't seen before. And a big picture question might reconnect the discussion to strategy. The question isn't there to make the meeting more interesting, it's there to redirect attention. Sometimes one good question changes the quality of the whole conversation. And then there are these scenarios. Think of them as a safe place to rehearse your board training in a box. Because governance judgment isn't developed only by reading guidance, it develops through practice. In each scenario, trustees receive slightly different pieces of the same situation. One person may know about financial risk. Another may know about pressure from parents. Another may know that the head is already dealing with the staffing problem. No one person has the whole picture. That's fairly close to what real governance is. The group has to share information, test assumptions, and decide what belongs to the board. And then a complication goes and changes the whole situation. New information arrives, an earlier assumption no longer holds, and the board has to think again, has to pivot. There isn't one approved answer. The learning is in how the board reasons under pressure. That's the wider idea behind collective governance by design. It isn't a system for making every board behave in the same way. It's a system for helping boards become more deliberate about what they need to understand, more deliberate about the questions they ask, more deliberate about the conditions they create, more deliberate about where to focus, and more deliberate about how authority and responsibility are shared. The cards are the tools. The real work is the conversation. The board might use one principle to sharpen an agenda item. It might use 2 practices to improve a board paper. It might use a lens when a discussion becomes narrow, or it might use an inquire card when assumptions are going untested. Or it might use a scenario during an induction or board development. It doesn't have to use everything, and it doesn't have to follow a fixed sequence. Start with the work. Bring in the part of the deck that helps. That may be enough to change just one question, one discussion, one decision. And over time, those small changes become the way the board works. That's what collective governance by design is for. Not to tell boards what to decide, to help them think together well enough to decide responsibly. Because systems shape behavior, repeated practice shapes culture.